All right. Hello to all my fellow movie fans out there. Today I'm going to be talking about the movie The Man from Earth. Now, this movie has a whopping 7.9 out of 10 on IMDb, which is a huge score, a huge IMDb score. For the record, the top 250 of all time list starts with 8.0 rated movies. So that's how close this movie sits to the top 250 of all time. But ultimately, with the score that it's at the time of recording this video, it's sitting at 520th place out of all movies on IMDb. That's the 520th best movie of all time, according to its rating on IMDb. Is it really that good? That's what we're gonna try to answer in this video. And before we get into it, I do also just want to say that this movie is free to watch at the time of this recording that I'm doing on IMDb TV, which is actually a pretty cool streaming service. I've been using it a fair amount recently to watch a lot of movies that I'm reviewing, and I've been really enjoying using it. So you might check that out if you end up wanting to watch this movie after this discussion of it. So getting into it, I'm going to go ahead and start spoiling soon, but not yet. First, my thoughts going into the movie before I watched it. I didn't really know anything about it. I knew nothing about it, essentially. All I knew that it was a very highly rated movie. It was free on IMDb TV. So I thought, all right, let's check this out and see if it's really that good. All I did was I read the description, and I'm just going to read you the description here of what the description is for the movie. The description is, it's an impromptu goodbye party for Professor John Oldman. The party becomes a mysterious interrogation after the retiring scholar reveals to his colleagues that he has a longer and stranger past than they can imagine. So I read that, and I'm looking at the picture of the movie, the little thumbnail clip of the movie, and it kind of has like a space aliens vibe to it whenever I was looking at it. And it's called The Man from Earth. So the only thought I really had going in was, and I don't even like reading these descriptions of movies, but my only thought was, okay, this is going to be some kind of like an alien movie. It's going to turn out that he's actually an alien. And then probably I'm not really going to care what happens after that. But I guess let's go ahead and see and find out. All right, so then I went ahead and watched the movie. And immediately the first thing that I notice about the movie as soon as I start watching it, so here's where the spoilers are going to start coming in case you want to avoid any potential spoilers at this point. The first thing that I notice is it feels pretty low budget. Like even just the first couple shots of the movie, it just has a really low budget feel to me, which of course I tell myself, like, I'm fine with that. I'm fine if it's a low budget movie, I can handle it if it's really good or whatever, but let's see. But it definitely, pretty much everything about the movie by the time it was from start to finish felt pretty low budget. I didn't mind it that much because the movie also is essentially just like a really long conversation between a group of people in a room. And so, okay, inevitably it didn't help, like, hurt it that much, but it did detract from the experience for me. The other thing that I noticed really quickly after the kind of low budget feel to it is just the characters and their acting felt really like unnatural to me, and the dialogue just didn't feel good. I don't know if it was the actual like written dialogue itself or if it was just the way that the characters were acting, but it felt pretty off to me. It felt very unnatural, and frankly, I just didn't feel like the acting was very good for a lot of these characters. The main character, I thought he was all right. He has this kind of like stoic quality to him. Kind of reminded me of John Hamm, like a character that he would play. Just kind of this like handsome guy talking sort of monotone. He has kind of like an eerie quality to him, but I thought he was all right. And some of the other characters I thought were fine, but some of them, like every time they spoke, I just thought something seemed really off about the way that they talked and the way that they were acting. So getting into the plot of the movie now, basically the movie starts, the main character is pulling up to his house. He's packing up his boxes. He's getting ready to move, basically. And then a bunch of his colleagues come over. There are a bunch of these scholars. They're like professors and stuff like that. They all come over and they ask him, hey, what's up? What's going on? You just ran away from the party that we were having. without saying goodbye to any of us, and you're acting real strange. What's going on? And finally, he says, after there's a little back and forth about this, he starts to think, should I tell you guys? I don't know if I want to tell you guys. And then he finally decides, okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell you. I guess it seemed like he had never done it before. And then he ends up revealing that he's really old. And so when he says that he's really old, he's something like 10,000 years old. And that's the first kind of big reveal of the movie, that it's going to be this kind of different movie. And that's basically like the main plot line of the movie, is him revealing that he's actually 10,000 years old. And then all these professors start asking him all these different questions. And the professors will say like, oh, well, my area of study is such and such, so I want to ask you about this, about your history. And they're also sort of interrogating him at the same time, because obviously they don't believe him, and everybody says, you're funny, it's a funny joke, but hey, let's run with this joke and think about what it actually would be like if there was a person who was 10,000 years old. And honestly, I would say that's basically the movie in a nutshell, is what would it be like if a person lived for like 10,000 years on planet Earth? They all just go back and forth talking about what it would be like. And he's always, of course, acting like he is 10,000 years old, because that's the plot of the movie. And they're always sort of acting like he's 10,000 years old, like playing like he's 10,000 years old. And so it's just kind of like this big, long back and forth discussion between all these characters of what that would look like. And they tell him things like, oh, this would be like an interesting novel for you to write. It's an interesting idea. We're having fun kind of pursuing this idea of what it would be like to be that old. And he talks about how Earth was whenever he was first born, and how it's hard for him to like remember what it was like back then. And they ask him, and then when they're interrogating him, they're like, don't you remember? Can't you tell us about this, about what it was like in old times? And he says a bunch of different things like, oh, I can't really remember what it was like when I was young. Can you remember what it's like when you were young? That's what it's like for me. So I don't really remember that time very well. And the way that he remembers things are very different than what you might expect, because of course you might expect like, oh, tell us about your full 10,000 year history, but it's like very fuzzy in different parts, but then some parts it's not as fuzzy. And that's pretty much the movie. At one point, there's this other professor who comes and joins the hangout session, and some mildly interesting things happen. Like the guy ends up pulling a gun on him and points it at him. And I just saw the movie super recently. I already don't exactly remember even like why exactly he pointed the gun at him, but it was just kind of like this crazy moment. The guy's wife had just died or something like that. And so he's in like this bad mood, and he didn't like how the conversation was going, didn't believe him or something. He pulls a gun on him, points it at him. He says, well, what's going to happen if I just shoot you? Are you going to die? You're saying you're 10,000 years old. What if I just shoot you? I'm pretty sure then you would die. And eventually he just decides he's not going to do anything. Turns out the gun wasn't loaded anyways later. And then it turns out actually at the very end that there's this big reveal about those two characters, which I'll say for just a minute. So there's a couple slightly different things that happen besides them just sitting in the room having the conversation, like him pulling the gun on him and kind of having this crazy moment. So one of the characters really goes crazy when he starts saying some of the stuff. And as if some of these things aren't a little bit ridiculous sounding and crazy enough sounding, at one point in the movie, the main character reveals that basically he's Jesus Christ, that at one point in his 10,000 year history, the way that he was doing things and wanted things to happen, he ended up becoming Jesus Christ, and he hung out with the Buddha and all this other crazy stuff. And when he says that he's Jesus Christ, one of the characters starts kind of going crazy because she's not sure if he's telling the truth or not at that point. And some of the characters are starting to think maybe he is telling the truth. And he says, I'm Jesus, and gives this whole backstory about how it happened that he became Jesus and all these other things. And it's a little absurd at that point. Whenever that happens, I'm kind of like, okay, this is a little bit ridiculous. And he acted like, oh, I'm not sure if I should tell people this or not, but okay, I'll tell you, I'm Jesus. It happened a little differently than that, but that's essentially what happened. I actually liked one point in the movie where he stepped outside with his girlfriend at the time, and they were having this discussion where it made it seem like she basically believed him, and started having this kind of conversation of like, well, what's it going to be like for us to, because I kind of want to keep dating you. Should we keep dating? And like, what would that be like if I was going to be with you and you're not going to grow old and I'm going to grow old? Kind of almost like a Benjamin Button, where the one character is going to going to grow old and the other one's going to be young. And it's going to be this kind of odd relationship, but they want to try to figure out like maybe they can work through it. I actually kind of liked that scene. I actually thought it was interesting. I thought it was a kind of a cool scene. I liked the acting in it and the message behind and just the love story, tiny love story in it. And then at the very end, I actually would have to say I kind of liked the ending. It was also a little absurd, but I actually enjoyed it. And in the end, the older professor who had pulled the gun on him overhears him and his girlfriend talking about how he had taken all these pseudonyms on throughout his life. And so his name is Professor Oldman in the movie, Professor Oldman. And he talked about some of these other pseudonyms he had. And then it turned out that one of the pseudonyms was actually the older gentleman who pulled the gun on him. It was actually his dad. So it turned out that he was actually his dad. And then the guy realizes it and they start talking about their past from when he was a kid and how, you know, he never really knew his father that well or whatever it was that happened there. And then he has a heart attack and dies. And that's basically the ending of the movie. The not the main character, but the other character has a heart attack. Of course, the main character doesn't have a heart attack because he's going to live forever for whatever reason. So my final thoughts of the movie. The plot is interesting. The plot is thought-provoking. You know, I'll admit it's very thought-provoking. And when I'll go ahead and do just a quick foreshadowing here. I didn't like it that much. I thought it was fine, but I wasn't that thrilled by it. And on IMDb, I wanted to see why so many people thought it was such a good movie. Most of them gave reasons like, you know, it's interesting, it's unique, it's thought-provoking. I agree with those things. So the plot was thought-provoking. But at the same time, I found the plot to be, I mean, incredibly implausible. You know, it's founded on this fact about how he lives for 10,000 years. It's fine. Okay, it's a movie, so let's have fun kind of thinking about what it would be like for somebody to live 10,000 years. But also for me personally, whenever there's things that happen in movies that are totally implausible, it really detracts from the experience for me. And I feel like they would have needed to find a little bit better ways to figure out like how he actually lived for 10,000 years, which would have made it more interesting. But I don't know if they would have been able to figure out a way to actually have that happen. But I would have liked to see something like that. And again, when the movie is supposed to be realistic and how his description of living, what it's like to live for 10,000 years and all the details of him being alive for 10,000 years, you know, they're trying to kind of make it believable, but then the fact that he lives for 10,000 years to me was just so unbelievable. And it didn't really flesh out, I feel like how he lives for so long. Like he has some kind of super immune system or something like that. It's not really clear like why. It's kind of like he doesn't really know himself. He just knows that he just basically doesn't age. But then it's like when the character pulled the gun on him, and it's like, what would happen if I shoot you? Would you die? It's like, okay, if you're alive for 10,000 years, I mean, think about how many people die of things like car accidents and stuff like that. I mean, he was driving a car in the movie. If he had been around for as long as he'd been, he probably would have gotten in a car accident sooner or later. And I'm not really sure what power he has that keeps him alive, but he probably would get damaged from that. And all the other millions of things that can happen to people just running around in life, getting, you know, any kind of bodily injury. Okay, maybe when it comes to like disease and sickness, okay, but even then it's pretty hard to believe. Again, the seemingly low quality overall of the filming really took away from the appeal for me, which, you know, again, I feel like a movie like this, it shouldn't have had to feel so low budget. Like, yes, it was low budget, but since the movie was them just all hanging out in somebody's house, I would have liked to have seen a little bit better quality overall and not have to feel like it's such a low budget kind of crappy movie, at least in that sense, was how it came off to me. And again, some of the acting, like, oof, ouch, like just ouch. Some of the acting and the dialogue was just downright cringy, in my opinion, throughout the movie. And again, whole scenes, they just felt really unnatural, in addition to just what was, in my opinion, just bad acting of the individual characters. Like again, if they're just sitting in a room chatting, I don't feel like naturally, even if they were all sort of saying the things that they were saying and having the conversation like they were, it just didn't feel natural in that setting how they were all interacting with each other. So, in conclusion, the question is this really a top 1000 movie? Is this really a 7.9 on IMDb? A 7.9? Is it really this high up, like 520th place out of all time of all movies? You probably already know what I'm going to say. My answer is no. Let's take it in two parts. The first question is it a top 1000 movie? Ugh, I don't think so, but like I think you could make a case for it. Obviously, all these people that are rating it so high on IMDb, they think it's amazing. They love it. They think it deserves to be there and belongs there. Like I can see how you can make the case for it, but I have to say, when we have movies like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in the 900s and like Watchmen in the 900s, which is actually one of my favorite movies. You've got Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums. Again, you've got the Tarantino in there. You got like Apollo 13, some Harry Potter movies. Those are all in the 900s. Those are all 7.6s. So to compare this movie and think top 1000, it's not, in my opinion. Again, I can understand why the argument could be made. It is different. It is interesting. So I agree with people that say that. And that's an amazing, great, wonderful thing to have in a movie, for it to like introduce you to a totally new idea, make you think about something totally new and different. But I mean, I would say like The Watchmen did that for me. I'd never seen anything like The Watchmen before. Yes, it's a superhero movie, but it was so different than one I'd ever seen. It was very thought-provoking to me. I still think about it. In fact, people still talk about Dr. Manhattan to this day. I heard someone talking about Dr. Manhattan recently. I think it was on a podcast. The interesting idea and how our society might be moving towards something like that. So when you have these kind of comparisons, I'm sorry, I don't think it makes the top 1000. And I can say, for me, definitively, it's way too high up on the list and way too high of a rating, by the way. I mean, 7.9, like this is not a 7.9 movie. I mean, I watched recently Nightcrawler, which I'm going to do a video on, and I think that was a 7.8. I mean, that movie just completely blows this one away, no questions asked. So there's no way this is a 7.9 and 520th best of all time movie. There's just no way. It's way overinflated. With all that said, am I glad I watched the movie? Yes. I would say with how I feel about it now, I wouldn't have been happy necessarily if I'd had to like pay full price to see it. But since it was streaming for free at the time that I watched it, I was all right with it. And again, do I agree with the people that rated it highly on the main things the movie has going for it? Like, again, these different unique things that make you think, etc. I mean, yeah, I agree. So in fact, I do think the plot is interesting. And if you think the plot sounds interesting, and again, it is, and it's going to kind of make you think you like the idea of it. If you can go catch it for free right now on IMDb TV, I say, yeah, probably go for it. If you're not sure and you're going to have to pay for it, and there's all these other movies you can watch instead, probably skip it. Let me know what you do ultimately if you do decide to watch it, and let me know what you think. Do you agree? Are you one of the people that thinks it's actually one of the 520th best movies of all time? If so, please explain to me how it is better than all these other movies. I guess it's going to be that it's just so interesting and unique and thought-provoking, but let's see.